A ripple of laughter echoed across the crowded estate auction as a young woman quietly raised her bidder's card for one last forgotten item. It wasn't a sparkling antique or a priceless painting that caught her attention. It was an ugly, rust-covered steel chest shoved into the darkest corner of an old barn in rural Montana, welded completely shut, covered in decades of dust, and dismissed by every collector in the room as worthless junk. When the auctioneer accepted her final bid of $100, people shook their heads, whispered that she had wasted her savings, and smiled with pity. None of them knew that before the sun set, that rusty chest would reveal something far greater than money, changing not only one life but an entire community forever. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness, honesty, and second chances can completely change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who loves inspiring stories, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another heart-touching story. The young woman's name was Grace Harper, a 26-year-old volunteer librarian living in Billings, Montana. She worked long hours for modest pay, cared for her elderly grandmother Ruth, and believed every forgotten object carried a forgotten story. Her love for history had begun as a little girl when her grandfather would rescue broken furniture and abandoned family heirlooms from estate sales, telling her that every scratch and every dent represented someone's dreams. After both grandparents struggled financially for years, Grace learned that true wealth was measured by compassion rather than dollars. Even so, paying $100 for an ugly sealed chest represented nearly all the money she had managed to save over several months. The estate being auctioned had belonged to the late Samuel Carter, a quiet widower who had lived alone for decades on a weathered ranch surrounded by rolling hills. Since no close relatives had appeared after his passing, nearly everything he owned was placed on auction tables. Collectors eagerly fought over antique clocks, handcrafted rifles, paintings, silverware, and vintage furniture, while the welded steel chest remained ignored. Its surface was layered with rust so thick that no one could even recognize its original color. A faded handwritten tag simply read, "Do not open." Instead of making buyers curious, the warning only convinced them it contained nothing valuable. Grace noticed something others ignored. Beneath years of rust, tiny hand-carved initials had been carefully etched into one corner of the steel. They looked deliberate, almost loving. She couldn't explain why, but something inside told her the chest mattered. After the auction ended, several workers loaded the heavy chest into the back of Grace's aging pickup truck. More laughter followed her as she slowly drove away, wondering herself whether she had acted foolishly. Yet her heart remained strangely peaceful. Back home, she and her neighbor Michael, a retired mechanic known throughout the neighborhood for helping anyone in need, examined the chest inside his workshop. Every lock had been welded shut years earlier, and even industrial cutting tools struggled against the thick steel. It took nearly 4 exhausting hours before the final weld surrendered with a loud crack that echoed through the garage. As the lid slowly lifted, both of them froze. Inside was not gold, jewelry, or stacks of cash. Instead, hundreds of neatly bundled letters rested beneath protective cloth, along with dozens of journals, military medals, faded family photographs, children's drawings, newspaper clippings, and carefully preserved documents. Everything had been organized with astonishing care, untouched by moisture thanks to the airtight welds. Grace gently unfolded the first letter. It had been written by Samuel Carter during the early years of the Vietnam War. Every page described his determination to return home and build a better future. The following letters revealed heartbreaking losses, sacrifices, friendships, acts of courage, and promises made to families of fellow soldiers who never came home. Many envelopes had never been mailed because the recipients had moved, passed away, or simply disappeared over the decades. Grace spent the next several evenings reading page after page, often wiping away tears. Hidden among the journals were complete family histories of dozens of military families, carefully researched by Samuel over nearly 50 years. He had quietly devoted his life to ensuring that forgotten heroes would never truly be forgotten. Then she discovered something extraordinary. One journal contained detailed instructions asking whoever eventually found the chest not to sell its contents, but to reunite every letter, medal, and photograph with the surviving families whenever possible. Samuel wrote that memories belong to people, not museums, and certainly not locked boxes. Grace knew exactly what she had to do. Although she had very little money, she began contacting veterans organizations, local churches, historical societies, libraries, and genealogy volunteers throughout the United States. Some searches lasted only hours, while others required weeks of determined research. Little by little, families began receiving unexpected phone calls informing them that pieces of their loved ones' lives had finally been found. In Ohio, an elderly widow received the final letter her husband had written before returning home from war, a letter she never knew existed. In Texas, grandchildren held medals they had only seen in blurry photographs. In Georgia, siblings discovered journals explaining why their father had rarely spoken about his military service. Every reunion brought tears, gratitude, and healing that had waited for decades. Local newspapers soon began reporting Grace's remarkable mission. Television stations arrived to document the emotional reunions, but Grace always insisted the real hero was Samuel Carter, the quiet man who had preserved countless family histories without expecting recognition. Months later, historians carefully examined the journals and discovered they contained first-hand accounts of humanitarian rescue efforts that had never been officially documented. Universities requested permission to archive copies, while veterans' museums offered preservation assistance. Samuel's lifelong work suddenly became recognized as an invaluable historical treasure, not because of financial worth, but because of its humanity. One afternoon, representatives from several veteran organizations gathered in Billings to honor Grace and Samuel together. They unveiled a memorial reading, "Some treasures are measured not by gold, but by the memories they return." Then another surprise arrived. Samuel's attorney contacted Grace with previously overlooked legal documents. Hidden among unrelated paperwork was an updated will explaining that whoever honored Samuel's written wishes regarding the welded chest would inherit ownership of the remaining undeveloped acreage surrounding his ranch. Samuel had believed that anyone willing to value forgotten memories above personal wealth deserved the opportunity to create something meaningful for future generations. The land itself wasn't a fortune, but community members, veterans, and charitable foundations united to transform it into a peaceful memorial park dedicated to military families, local history, and community service. Walking trails displayed copies of selected letters. A small museum preserved Samuel's journals. Volunteers planted hundreds of trees, each representing a reunited family. Grace became the park's first director, continuing her library work while helping visitors reconnect with stories that might otherwise have vanished forever. School children visited every year, learning that compassion often hides beneath ordinary appearances. Families who once believed precious memories had disappeared forever now gathered for annual remembrance events, celebrating lives that history nearly forgot. The same auction attendees who had laughed months earlier returned for the grand opening. Many quietly admitted they had judged the rusty chest far too quickly. They had seen only rust and broken metal, while Grace had seen possibility. The welded chest never contained the fortune people expected. It contained something rarer, unfinished promises finally fulfilled. Families reunited with their history, forgotten sacrifices remembered, and proof that one compassionate decision can echo across generations. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that kindness can uncover treasures no amount of money can buy, please support this video by liking it, sharing it with others, and subscribing to the channel so more inspiring stories can reach people who need hope today. Before this story ends, please leave a comment and tell us, what hidden treasure do you believe matters more than money? Sometimes the world laughs at people who choose compassion over profit, because true treasure rarely shines on the outside. It often hides beneath rust, behind closed doors, or inside forgotten memories waiting for someone brave enough to care. Grace Harper walked into an auction with only $100 and walked away carrying something priceless, a legacy of hope, healing, and love that no amount of wealth could ever equal. And long after the laughter faded, the story of one welded-shut rusty chest continued, reminding thousands of people across the United States that the greatest treasures are never the ones we keep for ourselves, but the ones we return to others with open hands and grateful hearts.